We're opening with one of the Himalayas of the classical music repertoire, this gigantic, hugely important work, the Beethoven Ninth, which is maybe our greatest monument of all. And it's a piece, it's unthinkable that as great as this work was, Beethoven never heard it. He was stone deaf. And here he is writing a symphony called Joy, in essence. The Ode to Joy is really a poem by Friedrich Schiller. And Beethoven loved it all of his life, even going back to his teenage years. He started sketches, which later turned into the famous hymn that we all know as the Ode to Joy. But the Beethoven Ninth is much more than the Ode to Joy. It ends with that music. But joy comes about only through profound struggle. And somehow in the adversity, we find our strength. We find our answer. That seems to be what the course, this 70-minute course of the symphony is about. Do you know why the compact disc is 74 minutes long? Because the then president of Sony was a classical music fanatic. And he wanted to be sure that the compact disc would at least be able to play the Beethoven Ninth Symphony from beginning to end. So he looked up the longest performance that he could find, and he said the compact disc needs to be able to play that long, and it was 74 minutes, and that's why we have the compact disc that we do. That's how important the Beethoven Ninth Symphony has become in all sorts of ways. And it's influenced every generation of composers since. In fact, to some extent, you could say that the Ninth Symphony has shaped the entire 09-10 season of the Orlando Philharmonic. This was the last symphonic work of Beethoven. The next great successor to Beethoven we think of as being Brahms. And for better or for worse, Brahms as a young man was announced by one of the great geniuses of the time, Robert Schumann, as the logical successor to Beethoven. The young Brahms was to be the next Beethoven. It made him very self-conscious about producing his first symphony. And in fact, he went fully into his middle age, having composed a series of masterpieces for string quartet and his first piano concerto and works for chorus, holding off that moment that he would have to be compared to Beethoven. And when he did finally produce his first symphony, it was consciously, it paid tribute to the Ninth. But the first orchestral work that he wrote was the piece that we begin the concert with, the Brahms Haydn Variations. And in a way, it's very like Beethoven. Beethoven was also a composer of variations, a master of variations. So in a way, that's a homage. But also, it's very small. Its ambition is slight. It's only a 15-minute work. And so I think, in a way, it was Brahms modestly saying, I'm not yet ready. Then the second program, the Shostakovich Fifth Symphony, is very Beethovenian. One thing that Beethoven established with the Eroica Symphony, and the Ninth Symphony in particular, was that these works had a kind of moral power. They had the ability to move a society through the statement of the artist. This was something that before the French Revolution, artists who were servants would have no business saying. But with Beethoven, suddenly music becomes his, a symphony becomes his pulpit. It's his opportunity to shake the world and bring some profound message to help change or shape that world. Shostakovich in his Fifth Symphony did exactly that. And it seems that through an incredible vision of possibility for himself, he not only wrote a work that could in the moment be celebrated by the Soviet regime, who had flexed their muscles and intimidated him to the point that he feared for his life. So he had to write according to formula on the one hand, but on the other hand, it seems clearly now, decades later, we can look back at it and see it was also a declaration of independence for Shostakovich. And to me, that kind of statement of the role and the power of the artist is something that Shostakovich would have learned from his favorite composer, who was Beethoven. In our third classical program, we performed the Schubert Ninth Symphony, which in a way was the next great symphony after the Beethoven Ninth. Schubert, in his late years, and by late years I mean in his late 20s, Schubert, of all the great composers, died the youngest. He died at the age of 31. Said, I'm writing these string quartets to prepare me to write a great symphony, by which he meant a symphony in the tradition of Beethoven. And his great C major symphony is his answer to Beethoven. The Dvorak's Seventh Symphony on the fourth program also in a way is Dvorak's most classically accomplished work in the style of Beethoven. And then happily our season ends with a new work of a living composer, Stella Sung, making her own great statement. And her role in Orlando is so different from anything we could compare with Beethoven's in Vienna in the early 19th century, but very important to Orlandoans, and her voice and her vision and her ability to help us define what our role is in society today has been profound at the Philharmonic.